Hello class. Look at section 10.2, solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is on page 739. This is another way to solve for x. We have x equal negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and it's all divided by 2 over a. So it is so important that you write that formula down because that's what we're using in today's lesson. We have talked about solving quadratic equations. I know an equation is quadratic if the degree is 2. So x squared, if I see a equation has x squared in it, I know it is a quadratic equation, quadratic function is quadratic. In our previous chapters, we have looked at how to solve for x when we see quadratic equations. We had to first factor it, and then we set each parentheses equal to 0 and solve for x. That was one strategy that we used. And now we're going to look at the quadratic formula. So you can factor and solve for x, or you can apply the quadratic formula. You can also complete the square, but we did not talk about completing the square. But that's also another way you can solve quadratic equations also. So we talked about two strategies. We talked about writing the problem in factored form and then solving for x, which is very important to know how to do. And we're now talking about the quadratic equation. Let's look at a example. I'm going to look at number 18 on page 743. And I want you to make sure you remember that formula. We have 3x squared minus 10x plus 8 equal 0. Now the first thing I want to do is identify my a, b, and c. A is the leading coefficient. B is the second term. Make sure you include the sign. C is my constant term. Now, if you notice, I want to write the problem in standard form. And standard form is when I see everything on one side of my equal and it's equal to 0. We also want to make sure that it's in descending order. I have 2, 1, 0. Okay, so make sure, and that's how you write your problem in standard form. You want to write it in descending order, set it all equal to 0. When you're doing quadratic formula, you want to get it in that form. That way you can correctly identify your A, B, and C. Now let's look at our formula again. Notice that for B, we're going to plug in negative 10. For A, we're going to plug in 3. And for C, we're going to plug in positive 8. So definitely keep this formula in mind as I start plugging in. So look at your formula as I plug it in. I have x equal, and I want you to remember that we are solving for x. So whatever answers I get is going to be x. My degree is 2, so I know I'm going to have 2 answers for x. So the first part says negative b. So I'm going to say negative b is negative 10. Or you can skip a step and say negative times negative is positive, plus or minus the square root of b, which is negative 10, squared minus 4, a is 3, and c is 8. And it's all over. Make sure your fraction bar goes across the whole top part. 2 times A is 3. So we have identified A, B, and C, and we plugged it into our quadratic formula. If you have your calculators, you can type it in very easily, and we will try to do a calculator practice on this video so you can see how to type it in. Okay, but for now, let's work it out by hand. Two negatives make a positive 10, plus or minus the square root. Negative 10 squared is 100, minus 4 times 3 times 8 is 96, and it's all over 6. From there, keep cleaning up. I have 10 plus or minus the square root. I know 100 minus 96 is 4 over 6. Now right here, I see two answers. My first one is 10 plus the square root of 4 is 2 over 6, comma. And then the second one is 10. I have a minus sign here, minus 2 over 6. Okay, now from there you can continue to break down the problem. So my answer is 10 plus 2 is 12 over 6. 10 minus 2 is 8 over 6. Simplify. 6 going to 12 2 times. 8 over 6 simplifies to 4 over 3. So my two answers for X is 2 and 4 over 6. Okay, let's review that one more time. So the first thing I did is I want to make sure that my equation is written in standard form. So I do see 3x squared minus 10x plus 8 equals 0. I want it to look like that to do quadratic formula. A is 3, B is negative 10, and C was 8. I plugged it into my formula here. And I see negative B plus or minus B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. And I plugged in the 3, the negative 10, and the positive 8 for my A, B, and C. So all I did was substitution. Now, if I plug everything in correctly, it's super easy to work out from there. Okay, so from there, I have 10 plus or minus. Negative 10 squared is 100. Then bring down your minus sign. 4 times 3 times 8 is 96. 100 minus 96 is 4. And we know the square root of 4 is 2. I see plus or minus, so I separate this into two answers. I said 10 plus 2 over 6. Then I said 10 minus 2 over 6. 10 plus 2 is 12 over 6, which simplifies to 2. 10 minus 2 is 8 over 6, which simplifies to 4 over 3. Okay, let's do our calculator practice right quick. And I want to go all the way back to the beginning, because it's really easy. Right here, you have to remember that it is two answers here. So I'm going to type in my answers separately, but I know it's two answers there. So the first thing, I am on my TI 84 Plus. But again, if you have the calculators I recommended, it can work it out the same way this calculator does. You just need to find your fraction button. So you should see a box in the numerator and a box in my denominator. Use your fraction button to type everything in very neatly. Again, on the TI, you have to make sure you type in the right buttons. You have your negative sign and you have your minus sign. So you have to make sure that you type in the right key, or it's going to give you an error. So right here, I'm going to say alpha y equal enter, and that's my fraction button popped up. So I said alpha y equal enter, and my fraction button came up. So I'm going to say negative, okay, because that's a negative. Open parentheses, negative 10. Okay, so I said negative 10, or you say the opposite of negative 10. The negative sign has a lot of names. Negative, opposite. So make sure you remember that. Or if I didn't want to deal with the negatives, go ahead and multiply the negatives together. Two negatives make a positive. So if I did not want to fool with the negative signs, just say 10. Okay, so I'm going to do the plus first. I'm going to say plus, and then I'm going to say second x squared, because I want the square root button to come up. Second x squared. Open parentheses again. Then I'm going to write negative 10 again. Notice I haven't used the minus sign yet. Close parentheses, and then hit the x squared button. Now, this button is a minus, so I have to say minus. And then I'm going to say just 4. Parentheses mean multiply. So I'm going to say 4 times 3 times 8. Because parentheses mean multiply. If you don't like the asterisk, put parentheses around the 3 and the 8. It will still work out. One thing great about the calculator is it follows the order of operations. As long as you type it in right, it does order operations for you. Move your cursor down, and you're going to say 2 times 3. And if we did the math right, I should get 2. And I got 2. Okay, now, your calculator, it may not copy and paste, but the TI-84 does copy and paste. So, that's the first answer. I am not going to type all this back in, because I can copy and paste. So if you have a more advanced calculator, you can copy and paste. So I highlighted my problem and I hit enter. And it copied and pasted. So it's a very great calculator. If you're going to up-level math, this is definitely a calculator I would recommend you purchase. Now, the only thing different about the second part is it needs to say minus instead of plus. So I'm going to move my cursor up and over to the left. And I'm going to go back to where it say plus, and I'm going to say minus sign, not negative, because if I say negative, it's not going to work. So let me just try it. I'm going to say the negative sign and hit enter. Okay, so it did work. So on this calculator, the negative does work. On some TIs, it won't work. So my calculator might be a lot advanced. I love it. Okay, so I did hit the negative sign, and mine's worked. Yours may work, and it may not. So like I said on the last note, just play around with your calculator and see if you can use the negative sign or the minus sign together, and will it still come up with the right answer. Okay, so my answer they gave me was negative 10 over 3, and that's not what we had. We had 4 over 3. So let's see, because maybe it did work. Okay, let me copy and paste, and let me go back and put in the minus sign instead of that negative sign, because the negative sign gave me negative 10 over 3. So now let me do the minus sign and see what happens. Wow. Okay. So, very good. It's very good observation. I want you to notice right here, I put the negative sign down, and it gave me an answer, but the answer was not correct. The answer was negative 10 over 3. And the answer we got was 4 over 3. But when I went back and copied and pasted again and did the minus, it gave me the correct answer, 4 over 3. So again, you have to play around with your calculator, because some calculators you can use the negative or the minus and it will come out correctly, and then sometimes it won't work. In my calculator, using the negative sign did not work. You got to use that minus sign. Okay, so that's your calculator practice. So if you have your good calculator, try it out and use it, and that'll help you a lot on your work. Okay, let's keep going. We're going to do one more example, and that will be it for our notes for today. I want to do an example where I have to move the signs around. Okay? And we may do two more. We'll see. Okay. Let's look at number 21. 21, I have 8u minus equal negative 4u squared minus 3. Okay, so first of all, my problem is not in standard form. So I want to rewrite it. And to be honest, I want my leading term to be positive. It does not matter. It does not matter. But I want that leading term to be positive. So I'm going to move the negative 4u squared to the left, and it becomes positive. I'm going to keep the positive 8u to the left, so it stays positive. I'm going to move my negative 3 to the left. It becomes positive 3. And nothing is left over, so I say 0. So now I have it in standard form. Count down 2, 1, 0. And it equals 0. So I have it in my standard form that I want it in. Identify A, B, and C. A is 4. B is 8. And C is 3. Okay, so I want to use the quadratic formula again. And we have written that down. X equal negative B, so it's negative 8 this time, plus or minus the square root of B, which is 8, squared, minus 4A and C, all over 2 times A. And that is my setup. Very easy. Now, from there, I want to just simplify the problem. I have negative 8 plus or minus. And since we have advanced on our calculator practice, let's go ahead and do it all in one step. I'm going to say 8 to the second minus 4 times 4 times 3. And it gave me 16. Type everything under the root. Leave the square root out. Don't hit the square root on your calculator. Just type in the radicand, which is 16. But don't mess with the square root, and you'll get 16. Or you can say the square root of 16, and it'll give you 4. So you can definitely skip steps. 2 times 4 is 8. We want to separate this into negative 8. Plus the square root of 16 is 4 over 8, comma, negative 8 minus 4 over 8. Okay, so let's skip a little more steps. I know that negative 8 plus 4 is negative 4 over 8. And then negative 8 minus 4 is negative 12 over 8. And then you start simplifying your answers from there. So my first answer is negative 1/2. And my second answer will simplify. I can divide by 4. So it's negative 3 over 2. Let's review that one more time so we can understand all the steps. Okay, so originally my problem was not written in standard form, so I want to write it in standard form. I want my leading coefficient to be positive, but again, it doesn't matter because you'll still come out with the same answer. But just a good rule of thumb, try to get that leading coefficient to be positive as much as possible. So I moved the negative 4u squared to the left, brought down 8u, moved negative 3 to the left, and everything's equal to 0. Once I write in standard form, I can identify my A, B, and C. After that, I want to plug it into my quadratic formula. So negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC divided by 2 times A. Okay? Right here under my root, I just typed all of this in from left to right, and I got 16. 2 times 4 I know is 8. And bring down that negative 8 and that plus or minus. So now I have negative 8 plus the square root of 16 is 4 over 8, comma, negative 8 minus this time 4 over 8. Simplify my numerator. I got negative 4 over 8 for my first term, my first answer. And my second answer, I got negative 12 over 8. Simplify these two fractions, and I got negative 1/2 and negative 3 over 2. And that's my answer for number 21. Okay, I do want to do one more, because I want you to see one to where it might not break down as pretty. But let's look at just one of those. Number 25. I have 5x squared plus 5x plus 2x minus 1 equals 0. My A is 5, my B is 2, and my C is negative 1. Notice that on 25 it was already in standard form, 2, 1, 0, and it equals 0. It's already in standard form, so very easy to identify A, B, and C. Okay, plugged into your quadratic formula again. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4. A is 5, C is negative 1, and everything is over 2 times A, which is 5. Okay, so right here, I have negative 2 plus or minus the square root. Let's type that one in again. I'm going to say 2 squared on my calculator minus 4 times 5 times, and I'm going to say negative 1, not subtract 1. So I said 2x squared button minus sign 4 times 5 times negative sign 1, and I got 24. 2 times 5, I know it's 10. Okay, from here, can I break down that 24? We just got through talking about radicals in chapter 9, so we should know how to break down 24 very confidently. Two numbers I can multiply to get 24, but one of the numbers I can take the square root of it. Okay, so if I say 6 times 4, I know I can take the square root of 4 and put it back over 10. Okay, so next step, I have negative 2 plus or minus. I know the square root of 4 is 2. And then the square root of 6 stays under that root, all over 10. Now, think it back to chapter 9 notes. Keep the outside parts together and keep the inside parts together. My coefficients I see negative 2, I see positive 2, and I see 10. I can put those, I can simplify that together. Be extremely careful when you start simplifying this. And I always tell students to just break up the fraction. I'm going to just rewrite it so we can see it. Negative 2 over 10 plus or minus 2 square root 6 over 10. I broke it up because a lot of times students will cross out that denominator, and it's only supposed to be crossed out with part of the fraction, not every part of the, not the whole fraction. So this one was okay because I know I can simplify 2 and 10 to negative 1 over 5, and then 2 and 10 is 1 over 5. That simplifies fine. But it could have been a case to where maybe this was, well, not that one, that's still going to be 10. It could have been a case where this may have been 3 or something. If this was 3 over 10, I can't cross out. So it's important that when you see a problem that looks like this, to separate the fraction. Because if my coefficient was 3 over 10, I couldn't cancel out at all. or if this is 4 over 10, it would have simplified different. So you have to be very careful there. Okay, so now my answer will be negative 105. So we want to make sure we see that 1 plus or minus. Right here I see the square root of 6. So it's understood to be 1 times the square root of 6 over 5. And that is my answer. And it does not look pretty, but that's the answer because that's the lowest I can get it. But if you can get to this point right here, you are doing awesome. If you can get to this point, you're doing awesome. And then you want to build up to this point right here. Okay, so let's go over this one more time, and then that will definitely be it without notes for today. 25, it was already in standard form. A is 5, B is 2, and C is negative 1. Okay, I plugged it into the quadratic formula. So negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2 times A. Okay, so bring down negative 2, the plus or minus the square root. Type in your radicand to get 24. 2 times 5 is 10. Okay, we can break down 24. I thought I did some mental math here. I could either break it down to my prime factors, or I can think of two numbers where one of the numbers I can take the square root of it. And I know 6 times 4 is a good numbers to work with for 24. And I know I can take the square root of 4, which was 2. But I couldn't break down 6, so it goes back under that square root. And it's still over 10. Now right here, so I wouldn't mess up my crossing out and simplifying. I separate the fractions. I said negative 2 divided by 10 plus or minus 2 square root of 6 over 10 still. And then from there, I know negative 2 over 10 simplifies to negative 105 plus or minus the 2 and 10 simplifies to 105 again, but the square root of 6 is left over in that numerator. And that is my final answer. Again, these are two answers. Now, if I don't like this answer, I can write it as a decimal. These are just decimal answers. So on your calculator, you will say 105 plus square root of 605, and you'll get a decimal. And then you go back and plug in again, and you say negative 105 minus the square root of 605, and you'll get a decimal answer. But the book does leave the answer like this, and that's the way we're going to leave it as well. Okay, that is it without notes. Hopefully you understood this section very well. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. Please continue to study and continue to work on your assignments.